Welcome back to another Revopoint video. So today what we want to go over, as you can see on the table here, I have our mini marker accessories spread out. And sometimes with all the different marker accessory options to choose when scanning, it can leave you a little confused, scratching your head what to use. So that's what we want to go through in this video. So breaking down each individual accessory, first of all we have our marker block kit. We're going to get into how to use that. That comes with the pyramid marker, the bar marker, the half dome, and the ball. These are all very interesting. There's certain models depending on the shape, the size, how big they are, when to use these, and sometimes when to use them together. We're going to get into that. And then we have our two magic mats. One's for far mode, one's for near mode. Depending on what object you're going to be scanning, we'll talk about how to use these two. Photogrammetric metrology kit, the PMK. When to use this. What type of item, depending on what you're scanning, when to use the PMK. And of course, our highly reflective markers coming in 6mm, 3mm. What scenarios do you use these in? And recently, we've designed our marker tape. What type of item would you want to use marker tape with? We'll go over that. And of course, we have our turntable. Lots of times that has markers on top of it. And then the marker toppers as accessories that you can put on top of the turntable itself. So there's a lot we want to go over, but we want to clearly underline what scenarios, depending on what you're scanning, how to use these many different marker accessories. Let's get into it. All right, so for the first item that we want to talk about with our marker block kit of how to use the marker accessories within is this gear case cover. So it's kind of a unique item, relatively flat. It has these big circle areas, these hollow areas that might be difficult to pick up if you're not using different marker accessories. So how to make use of these? Right off the bat, I would say you don't need the bar. The marker bar would not be helpful in this situation. But as for the other three items, definitely can make use of them. The pyramid, the ball, and the half dome. How to use them? Well, right away, like I said, there's this big hole, this circle here. Place one of those in the center. You could put the half dome in there, maybe even two of them, so that you don't lose your tracking when scanning around it. The pyramids would be good for placing randomly around the item. Also add some half domes in between the pyramids. And then do the same with the ball. You have a smaller hole here, this circle, put a ball inside there so you don't lose tracking, and then place some more randomly around the item. That would be a good example of how to make use of those three. Also, I want to bring out, because this item is relatively thin, so later when you're editing it in the software, it might be difficult to cut it off, because as you're scanning it, no doubt it's going to pick up some of the table. So editing that out of the software will be tricky. So maybe try elevating it. You can use the pyramids to elevate it up right here. So just kind of where these screw holes are, let the pyramid point go right in there. And now later when you're scanning it and editing it, it's going to be really easy because this is all just open. It's not capturing any point clouds there. Make it really easy to edit. And you can still place some random domes around the exterior when it's elevated like that. So that's our first example of how to make use of the marker kit accessories with this particular item. And our next item here on the table is the crankcase. So it's kind of similar to the previous one we just scanned, a little bit smaller, but it's also dealing with you have those open holes in there. Also might want to elevate it like we did previously. So we'll start out with that right away. Again, it's a good one to use the pyramids. And these little screw holes here, you can elevate it up to get it off the surface so it will be easier to scan and edit later. That's definitely an option. If you don't want to do that, if you don't mind in the editing process splicing off whatever you catch of the table or the surface that you're scanning from, same concept as before, put the domes around it. You got these holes in the center, put the ball in there. But this one, unlike the previous, you could actually maybe use the bar, because I don't know if you can see this, but there are some of these screw holes, and the bar screw is just the standard fitting that you'd see on a lot of items. So if you feel this is handy, you could actually screw it into the item itself. So there's going to be a lot of mechanical items that you'll notice have screw holes on them, and you can literally directly screw the bar right into it. Might assist you with picking up the item and not losing tracking. something to keep in mind there. So you can definitely get pretty creative and flexible with this particular item and using all 4 of the different markers from the marker block kit. All right, for our next example, we have this face milling cutter. Interesting shape. You know, it's definitely not flat. It has some bulk to it, but a relatively smaller item. So how would you want to make use of these marker accessories? The bars could be an option. I guess if you have like a custom piece like this is kind of interesting. This is not one of our accessories, but if you have a flat metal base that has the screw holes in it, you could place that right on there. And notice how I placed some 6mm reflective markers on there. And if you want to screw the bars in like that around the item, that's an option, but kind of like annoying. You don't necessarily need to go through all that work. Really the easiest way when looking at the options here is using the balls themselves. And they're all magnetic. I don't know if I've mentioned that earlier. So it's like you can just stick them on the edge there. Sticks nice. And what's really great about the balls, later when you're editing, it's easy to cut them off because of the shape. You could use the dome, but notice how it's a little more awkward in cutting it off. It's not as easy, but because the ball kind of comes to an angle, it makes it real easy in the software to splice it off. And of course, if you're finding it frustrating, it's hard to get a nice clean scan at the bottom of the item, you could elevate it, so you could use the pyramids to elevate it up. That's an option. Or the domes too, whichever one you feel is a little more sturdy. But no matter what, the go-to in a scenario like this with this type of object shape, the balls are definitely going to be a good assistance in getting a good scan. Okay, then for our last mechanical piece here when talking about the marker block kit, we have this brake caliper. I brought him out more so just to show you that it might not even be necessary. When I previously scanned this, because it is feature rich, besides maybe putting some scan spray on there because of its reflectiveness, I didn't need to use any markers. If you put markers on here, it is awkward to cut them off in the splicing, in the editing software. But really, you're not going to find that you're losing tracking with an item like this. So I just kind of want to bring this out here. This would be an example of you most likely would not need to use any of the markers on it. Okay, for the last item I want to show you an example of is this sword when using the marker block kit. So we've scanned a lot of things that are flat, have the hollow circle areas in them, but nothing that's been narrow and long like the shape of a sword. So this gets kind of interesting. There's some options of what you would want to use in the marker block kit here. First of all, if you have the dual axis turntable, maybe you've noticed that there's these screws in there. You can use the marker bars for that. So if you had something long like a sword like this, I don't suggest necessarily, well, you could turn it on and rotate it, but the only thing with that, just it could get a little wobbly. But these bars, you can just keep on screwing them into one another, and that's definitely an option for how you could capture a long, narrow object like this. Also, as I mentioned, we have this nice little base here that we just kind of customized. Piece of metal, has screw holes in it. That would also be a cool option to use the bars in, because again, you could just place the sword right in the center, screw the bars in themselves, and I only have 4 here on the table. You're going to need to have more than that, because it's about 3 stacked on top of each other to get to the very top of the sword, and you'd want to have at least 4 corners. But what's also cool about this, you can make use of the actual balls here too. Stick them to the bar themselves, maybe even use the half domes, because as you're scanning this, to avoid losing tracking, sometimes the more markers the better in a situation like this, and you can definitely pick it up quite well. Or is there a way you could do this just laying it flat? Actually, you can do that as well. I've scanned it successfully in the past, just putting it on the table. If that was the case, put it on the table, and just like all the other items I've been showing you, just place these all around it. So to give something to track, won't lose tracking that way. You can make use of all of them. Maybe in this scenario I wouldn't use the bar to put down next to it, but I'd use the pyramid, the half domes, and the balls. Put it all the way around, scan it, and then I suggest probably just merging it later in the software. but having these different marker accessories around it, you will definitely be able to capture it quite well. So that's about it for the marker block kit. Of course, there are many more scenarios that you can use all these in, but I just want to give you a rough idea, different ways to use the different accessories with different shapes and sizes, the lengths, and hope you have a better idea now. Now we've arrived at talking about how to use our two different magic mats. We have the magic mat far mode and near mode. Near mode, you would use Mini 2, Pop 3, and then for the far mode, we have Range 2 and Morocco. But as you know, Morocco also has a near mode within it, so you could use Morocco on the near mode magic mat as well. So when using the magic mat, you're not going to need it far mode, scanning some big bulky object. It's really handy for an object again like this sword. We just did this in the previous portion of the video, but it's a perfect example. Something that's long, narrow, skinny, that type of item, you're going to want to put down the magic mat and it'll make it easy. But just make sure that when you have it placed on the table, on the magic mat itself, you're not going to be half covering one of these markers that's on the mat itself, because then the scanner will think that's actually part of the sword and add it on. So just make sure it's completely covered or completely showing when scanning. And then with the near mode, we have these two similar items. So something as small as this, it'd be difficult to even put some reflective markers on it. So that's the perfect scenario for it. You don't want to, we have the 3mm reflective markers that we're going to talk about soon, but it'd be pretty difficult to put them on there. So the magic mat is a perfect option. Just place it on there in the center again, making sure that you can fully see the markers around it, and you'll be able to capture it quite well. Or something a little bit larger, this size as well is good for near mode. Similar concept. Maybe with this too though, it actually is large enough that you could put some actual reflective markers, 3mm or 6mm within it, just to make it easier to not lose tracking. But those are typically what you would use the magic mats for. Definitely a very handy accessory because it saves you the time of adding the marker dots either to the surface or the item you're scanning. All right, for our next marker accessory, we have arrived at the PMK. What is the PMK grade for? Metrology grade scanning, and it's to be used with the Morocco Plus. It is an accessory to Morocco Plus. So we've already done videos on items that you would want to scan with the PMK. We scanned Ash's car, and that's exactly it. I'm not going to have anything too small that I'd use a PMK on, because you're typically going to be scanning a larger object. But what does it come with? It comes with the bars and also the coded targets. But you would never want to combine these coded targets. For instance, if you bought two kits, you cannot combine the two because each one is individually coded, having a number on it, and those numbers would be repeated in another kit. But as long as you're sticking to the kit that you have, you'll be fine placing them over your item. And of course, it also comes with some nice reflective markers as well, 6mm. So again, if you want more about the PMK, tune into that video, but typically metrology grade scanning, huge items, you're going to get amazing accuracy using the PMK, and it's to be used with the Morocco Plus. All right, we have arrived at the original, our favorite markers, just the highly reflective 6mm and 3mm markers. When do we use these? It's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, whenever you're having an item that's maybe not the most featureless, but what scenario, what size to go with when choosing the 6mm or the 3mm? Here I have this muffler. I actually combined them in this situation because you have this part here where it's a little bit more wide and big. I used the 6mm there. Also on the pipe itself, I added some 6mm, but then also added the smaller ones. But then you're going to have items like when we've scanned the helicopter that we just had to place the 6mm all over it. But then you're going to have something very small, featureless. Use the 3mm. And it's good to keep in mind how to place them. For the 3mm, you place them at about 1 to 4 centimeter distance. And then for the 6mm, 1 to 6 centimeter distance. But pretty much great for, like I said, anything featureless, difficulty tracking, you need to use them. But something I definitely want to keep in mind that I want to share with you is back in the day, you might still have some of these reflective markers. This was our originals. If you do still have them, just toss them out. They worked, but the new reflective ones are so much better. And if you ever come across these online, stay away from this. This is just like a total fake. So you'll actually see some companies selling, pretty much it's just paper, a paper sticker. You know, there's nothing reflective about it. This one's white. These are silver, then gold, and black. I mean, it's just not going to work. These are not real marker dots. Stay away from those online. Make sure you get the real reflective markers. But just super handy, can be used in many different scenarios and also combined with the other markers that I've already shared with you. But definitely a go-to in so much scanning. All right, the next marker item, accessory that we're going to talk about is the marker tape. Revopoint's recently released these. These are handy. So come in a box like this, and when you pull them out, it's like looking like that. Pretty much like a roll of tape, but then it already has the 6mm markers placed randomly on them. Definitely speeds things up because it is sticky on the back. Pull that away and you can stick it on an item. I mentioned earlier when we scanned back in the TVC video for Morocco, we scanned the helicopter. So we actually placed individual markers all over the helicopter. It took a long time. Obviously having some marker tape would speed that up because you can just roll it out, stick it on the item, kind of crisscross them, and it really makes the job a lot faster. Here we have an example, a long metal piece. Definitely need some markers to avoid tracking loss, and we just simply place them on there. And because they are random, makes the job a whole lot easier scanning it. That would be the benefit of marker tape. Last but certainly not least in our marker accessory discussion is we have the turntable. So the turntable is great. Put the markers on there. Some of them actually come with the markers on them already. As I mentioned earlier, it has these screw holes when using the marker bars. That's really handy. If you have the turntable that doesn't have the markers on them, that's when these marker toppers come really in handy. Great accessory. Just place that on top of the turntable, or a marker topper like this one. Just makes the job easy for, again, when you have a small item, maybe you're using mini or pop or the near mode on Morocco. It's nice to have it rotating, but of course it's going to be losing tracking, so you need those markers around it. And when they're already on the turntable itself or the topper, just makes the job that much easier. Okay, we just got done going through in detail how to use our many marker accessories, but something we haven't touched on yet is depending on which scanner you actually have, which reflective marker to use, the 3mm or the 6mm. So we have our scanners out on the table right now, and I've placed some of these markers on a paper to show you more so in detail the distance and which size to use. So for the Mini 2, it comes with the 3mm reflective markers. And as you can see, I've put them on the paper, and it's recommended that you place them about 2 to 4 centimeter distance. That would be for the best result. So within the frame, you also want to catch at least 5 of them in the frame for a good result, to not lose tracking. And then moving on to the Pop 3 Plus, I have on here is the 6mm reflective markers. Not to say that you can't use the 3mm, it's just probably best to use the 6mm, but they can be interchanged. And that is also the same distance as with Mini 2. Keep them placed about 2 to 4 centimeter distance from one another randomly, and have at least 5, as I have here, in the frame to not lose tracking. Now moving on to the Morocco in the range 2. So obviously the field of vision with these, using the Morocco far mode in the range, you're catching a lot more. So because of that, we recommend using the 6mm reflective marker. And as for within a frame in distance, it's 6 to 10 centimeter distance. And it brings out that you should have at least 8 to 15 in a frame, with as low as 4 in a frame. So maybe in the scenario when you're scanning something massive like a helicopter like we did, maybe you could get away within a frame just having 4. But for best results, use 8 to 15 and keep them at 6 to 10 centimeter distance. Then moving on to Metro X, always using the markers, that is 6 to 7 centimeter distance, and using also the 6mm. And I didn't bring this out, but because Morocco has the ability to use near and far mode. When using near, pretty much treat it like how you would treat Mini 2. So you would use the 3 centimeter reflective markers and keep them at a 2 to 4 centimeter distance. So this is all just to help you to get an idea, but as I brought out earlier in the video too, you can interchange them with some items depending on the shape of the object you're scanning, and some areas might be rather large going into narrow. So if that's the case, in the narrower spots, you're going to have to use the 3 millimeter instead of the 6 millimeter. But just for a rough idea, the distance is important and how many to have in the frame is important for best results. Hope that was helpful. All right, how sad we've come to the end of the marker accessory video, but no video would be complete unless we actually scan something, right? So we're just gonna simply scan this vase with Metro X. And this, the only marker accessories I'm using are just the traditional reflective, highly reflective markers. But the interesting thing is I'm using both the 3 millimeter and the 6 millimeter. Why? Just in this situation, again, there's some areas that's very feature rich that maybe I can't fit an actual 6 millimeter, so I put a 3 millimeter in. Areas like this area too, where it's a little more narrow. But let's get at it. I selected cross lines, marker tracking, and this is a metallic shiny object, so I'll switch it to that. And let's see how we do it. I'm not using any turntable. I'm just going to gradually kind of turn it with my hand. And then we'll edit it afterwards and see how it goes. All right, let's see how this turns out. Let's edit it some. Looking pretty good. Complete. Fusion, just do the recommended distance. All right, and there we have it, our final result of the vase. Looking really nice. All right, such a pity. The marker accessory video has come to an end. I hope it was helpful for you guys, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care.